right. Hello. Welcome to Zero-Duality. This episode, I'm going to try to continue on with a different approach. An approach which implies that there's a separation between the audience and the speaker. And if that already isn't something that begs the question of what exactly is it that we're getting into here? What does that even mean? You wouldn't be alone. You'd be in the category of the vast majority of people. So I know that this episode is not going to be one where I target that vast majority of people. This episode is, and largely this entire series, is one that I put together really primarily for networking purposes, meaning that I'm networking and I'm trying to get across or question together about whether there can be a radically different approach which resolves for the conflict at hand, whatever the problem that people get together to resolve is. And so the problems may be different, the networks may be different, but they all have in common this approach of which I would ask together about, which is different than look at the way that I see it. Look at what my opinion is. Look at what I believe. And because I am right, then this problem will be solved. And who's with me? So it's different. And so all that, meaning a fundamentally different approach, comes from reading Krishnamurti. We really have to get across who the heck is Krishnamurti? And Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and Yuji Krishnamurti, two Krishnamurtis, that their approach is both radically different as well as unified in that they have similar radical differences than the vast majority of people, right? And so, as a teenager, I was a bit troubled. I found myself very undisciplined in dealing with depression and anxiety, fitting in. I didn't know that I was autistic. I didn't know that I was autistic until my early 30s, my late 20s, around there. But that was what certainly played a role in, how different I can be. And so that, addiction issues began to play a role. And and even something like the topic of addiction issues there's a fundamentally different way of looking at it. And that's not what we're going to get to in this episode. But at the onset of what I'm trying to do, right, it's very simple. Either you believe in the disease model, right, wherein you have a disease that this allows you from drinking alcohol or doing drugs, or there's something inherent with your personality, that there's someone who is there, a psychological self who is there, who is fundamentally flawed in some manner. And so, and that manner can be identified with the word, addict. Right? So, when I got into high school, I really wanted to change my life. So I was delving into meditation, spirituality, maybe Eastern spirituality. And then I came upon the work of Jiddu Krishnamurti. So Jiddu Krishnamurti was someone who, at the very onset, I got to learn about his life. It was more of a biography. But as I got more into what the content of his inquiries together were, it became quite a life-changing experience, one that has changed my life into this day. And which can't be said for any other experience I've had in my whole life. Most of them, and like most people I've met, have never had an interest in truly inquiring together about whether there can be a radically different way of living. Right? And why? Why is it necessary at all to live radically differently? And so I remember reading about the observer being the observed, and it really clicking with me in actuality. Not as a theory, not as a concept, but as an actuality. And I remember trying to get that across a little bit to my teenage friends. My life began to settle in a way that with some of the benefits of abstaining from drugs and alcohol. I've got a friend group, right? I've got a girlfriend. I've got, my grades are picking up. Society's values are intact within me. And, but quickly I began to realize that that was not going to be possible. All right, not at the pace of how cultural and societal conditioning works. It's very fast, right? Very laden for centuries. That's what I'm talking here. Radically different. I'm talking about radically different than what has been the status quo for centuries. So that's a bit much. And so, since it was so different and fitting in was such of an importance as a teenager, I kind of let it go. I was like, there may be something not to this, or the degree of seriousness of which such questions beg, and maybe I'm not that serious. And so, my early 20s began, my late teens and early 20s were tumultuous, and then I got sober, right? And largely through the help of AA. But really, the help was having a space where people were serious enough, older people, and to be able to listen as an entirety, be able to let go of one's own psychological authority and replace it with another psychological authority. And so that's where AA and AA as a system, like any other system, weren't really going to come together in seriousness. Not really. But that's something that is so radically different that it's not apparent to most people about what could possibly be that which, an action of which, resolves for inner conflict and actuality. Anyway, I also couldn't help but find myself plugged in as a teenager, right, into my early 20s, as someone who was really taken with politics, and that somehow an ideological perspective, the right one, would resolve for problems. And so, in my early 20s, right, the motivation to rearrange my life and have it far more disciplined and orderly was to get into politics as a lawyer, right? And particularly the politics of Barack Obama. And so I went to law school, and throughout my undergraduate studies and law school, increasingly I found myself hearkening back to what could be the implementation of that very special quality in the domain of what would be considered the establishment of society's values, political, societal, socioeconomic values. And, I was able a bit to enjoy myself, maybe during a political science degree, and touch upon it a bit, but that's about it. In law school, it became increasingly clear that this radically different approach is radically different, meaning it's rare, meaning it's something that is not commonplace for most people, meaning that people are not going to be interested, meaning people are not going to get it, meaning people might be even offended, all right? So I was like, oh, geez, what am I going to do now? So getting back to, I think what I was explaining here earlier was that after law school, I was like, let me network and see if I can try to find some sort of open-mindedness somewhere. It even extends out to, I'll tell you, for example, people who believe that UFOs and aliens are visiting Earth and that there is a government conspiracy that is real and is trying to keep the truth hidden from you. So I was like, these people seem to have an open mind. And, and so we're at a time now where a lot of claims have come about in the halls of Congress. And due to the internet, there are many voices who are relatively able to be accessed, I mean, somewhat, like in conferences or something like that. There's a sort of legitimacy that's being tried to be tied into the knowledge that there are aliens and that there's UFOs that are alien spaceships or whatever. And even then, quickly I found that there's nothing fundamentally different about these human beings. Right? Because what is the interest of UFOs and aliens? Is it not that such knowledge would radically change humanity? So humanity is looking for a radical change. That something exterior, something out there will happen that will then change humanity to move away from war, move away from all of the difficulties that the human being faces, right? Very serious ones. And I found that no, the human being, even with the knowledge, the first-hand knowledge, right? Because we start to get technical about first-hand, second-hand, third-hand. For the most part, are still caught up in there being a thinker separate from thought. Still caught up in that, there's something right or wrong about this, or that the establishment of society structure as it has always been is capable of addressing it is reality, right? That there is alien spaceships tucked away somewhere, that aliens visit all the time, and that they abduct people and all that stuff. That somehow that structure could possibly come upon a resolution to something that's far beyond any notion of what order there being a thinker separate from thought brings, right? Because that's what's needed in order for systematic beliefs to exist, right? Right? And no. And so that's something that wouldn't be commonplace understanding for most people. Another avenue was law and technology. So, when it comes to the automated nature of thought and the automated nature of digital intelligence, artificial intelligence, that approach as it impacts labor, law, societal structure, not going to happen. Right now, that question about law and technology is very much in the purview of the experts. We utilize the automated nature of thought to come about some solution, because we're hearing the voices for the first time, really. People at big conferences, speakers, CEOs, saying, look, this is something that's going to fundamentally change. There's no going back if AI gets sophisticated, especially if it gets sophisticated in a very short amount of time. Right? So there's a lot of debate as to that. And, AI in the legal profession now is mostly just a tool. It's helpful. It can help you strategize, draft, whatever. But it's definitely not what it could potentially be one day, which is essentially, once it gets sophisticated enough, really will cut out this middleman. Right? And to explain and go into that, you can ask an AI. AI, how this guy saw this video, he's talking about that AI could get so sophisticated that it could cut the middleman lawyer out. Go, and it will give you 15 bullet points, and you can expand on them all you like. And so there was that, but then there was there's another sensitive area, which is the area of addiction and recovery, right? Which is that the systematic approach which educates the human being as to there being a psychological self here. That gets a little tricky. And that there's a new experience to be had. And that experience is not something that is always old, because in order for something to be experienced, it has to be put into the past. And that the striving to have an experience which goes ahead and is removed from the doldrums of the day-to-day will always result in difficulty. And so that systematic approach is replaced with another systematic approach. And it just can't find itself in enough cohesion, because that's the limits of systematic approach. It's limited. Not saying it's bad or wrong, but that it'll always be limited when facing an issue which has no limitation. So the doctors, psychologists, the 12-step subculture, right? It begs the question of whether there can be a radically different approach, right? What other avenues? I mean, physics even. Physics and how the interplay with there not being a fixed observer anymore, only a relative observer. That's what theory of relativity teaches us. And about how observation itself is in action already, which is quantum physics goes ahead and teaches us. Where all that could find itself in a manner of which will build some sort of network, asked to be interviewed somewhere, get on the YouTube channel, make money. Oh, cryptocurrency and blockchain networks, that's another one. I can go on and on, but the point is that a radically different approach, regardless of outward success or outward coming together, I suppose, has to be one which brings about a sense of clarity and order and intelligence just on life's terms. And I've grown more confident being able to see for myself where people are at due to the internet, where most people are at. Most people have never questioned the automated nature of thought. Most people have never questioned that. Most people have never questioned whether there is a separate psychological self here. You know, people go here. Most people have never questioned whether systems, organizations, structures that are conceptualizations of thought and systematizes the individual, whether such a limited approach can ever resolve for problems anywhere from government to whatever it may be, right? And so, little by little, I'm venturing into my 30s now, right? To my 40s, I'm 33. And having to come upon a patience that, I didn't before I was in school, and having to meet life on its terms, which is the way that society structure is set, and most people are set. And as well as continue looking for avenues of which such questions can come about. Because that's what they are, essentially questions of which either the individual finds for themselves or does not. But it is not something that is born out of the automated nature of thought, which we can only further fragment and further come upon limitation. So, yeah, I guess that's about it. I mean, maybe we'll dive a little bit more into Krishnamurti and about both Jiddu-Krishnamurti and Yuji. And because that's where most people are at. Most people are like, do you adhere to a philosophy? Do you adhere to a philosopher? Who is your psychological authority? And so it's difficult to say that Jiddu-Krishnamurti is, because Jiddu-Krishnamurti taught me how to learn, right? How to observe, and how to be able to live on a day-to-day without psychological authority, and including his. Right? And so I think Yuji taught me the sort of depth and seriousness that one has to really undertake. All right, to be able to, if someone is serious at all about living as such, then to live as such. And also the kind of sense of humor required, knowing that most people have no idea what you're talking about. They really, frankly, don't care. And that, the funny thing is that, once AI starts taking jobs and stuff, what are we going to do? What kind of questions are going to be most effective to bring about such a resolution? So it's all kind of coming to a fold. I think life is going to be pretty interesting because, none of this radical approach or whatever may come to a fold at all. But it looks like that technology is advancing at a pace where it may just provide an avenue for such a radical approach, one that goes ahead and questions assumptions that have been made for centuries. As something that can be commonplace, that can be day to day, a common person. This is what this video is. This video isn't an expert telling you how. This is not entertainment value. This is not something that is particularly interesting. You know what I mean? It's just the common person.